All right, so we're going to be talking about, this last month, September 2025, because September 2025 was a sucky month. Just straight up sucky month. It was horrible. September, bloody September, bleeding September, horrible dark September. It just felt gross to live in. Straight up, it just felt gross. And there's all this violence. There was the New Hampshire shooting. There was a few in Illinois. There was a shooting in Pennsylvania, these veterans who shot people. Charlie Kirk assassination, the cheering on of that, and the Mormon church shooting, and the ICE shooting. All these shootings, all of this horrible political or non-political violence going on, and it felt like the country was sick, that the country was coughing, it was dying. And I've never felt that way before. It felt gross. It was like, okay, where do we go from here? Because, for example, we're going to start off breaking this down with the Charlie Kirk shooting. You see this guy who, a lot of the left, they paint him up as just a podcaster. But in reality, he was more of a political, not analyst, more of a political activist. He was very good at getting young people engaged in politics. So here you have a guy who, for all the young right-wingers, got them interested, got them engaged, got them really involved in civic life. And here he is. He shot on camera a very gruesome video, and the response is to just cheer. So, in response to the cheering by, people who had their faces, their names, their job titles in their accounts, these people who should be public professionals, doctors, nurses, teachers, cheering for a political assassination, that led to a lot of reprisal in the form of canceling. And so you have this mass canceling of a bunch of left-leaning individuals, culminating in the firing of Jimmy Kimmel. Not Jimmy Kimmel. Yeah, Jimmy Kimmel. He's one of the Jimmys, right? There's Jimmy Kimmel, there's Jimmy Fallon. Conan was red Jimmy. Trevor Noah's black Jimmy. So, they're all Jimmys. But, culminating in Jimmy Kimmel's firing. Until he got rehired. But just the response was gross, right? These people cheering this on. And then there was the ICE shooting. And in response to that, there is just a bunch of weird conspiracy theories saying he was definitely actually just targeting the migrants. Did you see his bullets? They literally said anti-ICE. But, don't get me wrong, that's very weird. But this guy, he was a lefty. He was left-leaning. And, the fact that he said anti-ICE doesn't tell me that much. Honestly, these people, anyone who, violence is a sign of low IQ. So it doesn't surprise me that that's all he put on. But the responses on both sides, was very callous. The Republicans said, this is a symptom of the Democratic Party. The Democrats said, you made us do this pretty much. And I think they both could have stopped and said, hey, there's 3 dead illegal immigrants on the ground. Maybe we should try to see how they're doing, how their family is doing, and, give them some time to mourn. Give their families some time to mourn, because it's a tragedy that we had people die in, custody of police. Even though it wasn't the police, it was still in their custody. And, but I just thought I just thought the responses were callous. And then another shooting with a horrible response. There was the Mormon church shooting. And this got me confused because, this had the Mormons, a very, I guess you could say, conservative, right-leaning religion siding with the Democrats, with the liberals, who in response to the shooting said, they said, hey, this is a horrible thing. And, we believe that banning guns would be best for your safety. I personally disagree. I am a Second Amendment I believe in the Second Amendment, but I can see where they're coming from. They said, this is a horrible shooting. We do not want this in our streets. We are here to mourn with you, and we support your community. That was from the left. And from the right, from like the God-fearing evangelicals, their response, day one, they couldn't even wait one day to say, I'm not going to say all evangelicals, right? That we're gonna preface that, but a lot of the online evangelical community said, hey, you know what? This is sad it's sad that this happened, but they're not really Christian and the kid's going to hell. The 5-year-old girl who died, who got shot and then her body set on fire, she's going to hell, right? And this was like across the board. They wouldn't even say, this is horrible that happened, but a lot of times they'd say, they'd switch it around. They'd say, the Mormons, they aren't Christian. They kind of are going to hell. Their doctrine's damnable and they're going to be dragged to the firing pits. And there is a child that got shot. We feel bad that happened. You've got your priorities switched if that's what you're saying in response to innocent men, women, and children having their church ran into and then being gunned down, And these are the same people who, during the Charlie Kirk shooting, were saying, hey, you didn't just mourn. You said it's this is bad. It's bad this happened, but they said you can't add buts to the end of a statement after somebody died. And here they were a few weeks later doing the exact same thing. So, the society just feels sick, right? I don't know. I'd say I'm usually a happy-go-lucky guy. I just didn't feel happy-go-lucky this week. I didn't feel happy-go-lucky this month, Where's the smile? Turn that frown upside down. Didn't happen. Don't have the smile. We've got a frown, a permanent frown. It's staying on here till the day I die. No. I'm honestly probably going to be smiling like 2 minutes right after I'm done making this video. But it was just weird. It was gross. These people can't see their hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle. Like, they can't see their hypocrisy. And it's gross. And, in response to the Charlie Kirk shooting, Trump responded by declaring Antifa a terrorist organization. And I do agree that I think Antifa is very broad. You can't just say Antifa. I do think what I think should have been done is they should have listed out specific cells as terror organizations. For example, there's Rose City Antifa in Portland, which is a very famous cell known for committing violence, known for political violence, known for assault, known for robbery, known for pretty much blackmailing businesses and rioting and just extremism. And it wouldn't have taken that much to just just look at the more radical cities in the United States and say, okay, here are the radical organizations and the people associated with them. We are going to target these organizations specifically. And I feel like that would have been, I don't know, because you could always just form a new organization. But I feel like if they, had narrowed it down to specific areas and just saying Antifa, it would have been a lot better PR-wise on behalf of Donald Trump. But yeah, he labels Antifa domestic terror organization, which I don't think he's going to follow through on. I think, if we go 4 years from now, we're going to see a lot of violence still on the streets of Portland. I think we're going to see a lot of violence still on the streets of Seattle. I don't think, that they are going to take care of the problems, the extremism problems that do exist in these cities. I think he's kind of taking a half measure, and it's just going to backfire. But, he does this in response to the Charlie Kirk organizations, and he has, Operation Midnight Blitz in Chicago. And, I'm not entirely sure if it was motivated because of the Kirk shooting, but it does feel like he ramped up his rhetoric, at least he ramped up his rhetoric and a bit of the boots on the grounds in response to the Charlie Kirk shooting. And I feel like he was kind of dragging his, I wouldn't go that far, but, Operation Midnight Blitz. And I feel like he's not being affected. He's not arresting these people for committing violence. And, we see, instead of seeing these people thrown in jail and locked up for committing crimes, we see them back out on the street. We see them getting out, targeting officers. We see that in Chicago, well, not in Chicago, but in Illinois, there was the ramming of the police car. That lady, I believe, rammed a police car, and in response, the officers opened fire and hit her. So the Democrats are just being made more angry, and I feel like they're going to become more violent than they already were because, that line has been crossed. The genie's out of the bottle, and once it's out of the bottle, it's hard to put back in, right? So if you have a problem with this violence going on the streets, you have to deal with it heavy-handedly, and I just feel like Trump is not doing that. I think that he's just going to make people more angry and more violent, honestly. And this whole situation, and what I wanted to, talk about, is that it feels like, you've read about Bleeding Kansas in school. Bleeding Kansas between the Jayhawkers and the Border Ruffians. The Jayhawkers, they were the Free Staters. They had, Osawatomie Brown, John Brown. And they had the Jayhawkers. The Jayhawkers, they were the Free Staters, and then there was the Slave Staters, which were the Border Ruffians. They would come in from Missouri, and there was just a lot of violence in the United States at the time. And that's not something I think anyone wants. And we don't want groups like this forming, but I feel like they kind of have already formed, and they are already forming. I feel that if Trump does not come down hard enough on people committing violence in the streets, then citizens who are already galvanized after a political assassination and radicalized after this political assassination and the September in general, they're going to take up violence instead of the government. And this I guess you could call it this monopoly of power that the government does have is going to be dissolved in a lot of places, and it's just going to be partisans going after each other. I mean, we have seen a little bit of this in places like Portland in the past, and it's just ugly. And I'd say only now, out of any other time I've lived in, does it have the ability to sustain itself, right? I think we could see more violence in the country. And, I don't want to be doom and gloom and, living in an overcast sky. But it really does feel that way. We have people, for example, with the example of the Border Ruffians, they had famous senators, state senators, and government officials cheering them on. And then we have the tweets, the text from Jay Jeffries. And Jay Jeffries was straight up saying, he was supporting violence just straight up. And he wasn't even being, vague about it. He was saying, if this person's got shot, they breed little fascists. He's talking about kids. Come on. How evil do you have to be to want to condone death to kids? So you see people like Jay Jeffries only emboldening violence. And people are going to respond to that. We have. For a long time, I thought, the problem with Congress was just a bunch of old people who got nothing done. But, at least those old people had, I guess you could call them cold warriors, right? They had a little bit of a statesmanship to them. These new guys coming into Congress, they are absolutely brain dead. They are missing brain cells. They aren't smart enough to tie their shoes. And here we are electing them, and they just cheer on deaths. So, that's kind of my thoughts. We can't have politicians cheering on deaths. This feels like a horrible pun here. I'm not the first to use it, so please forgive me, but it feels like a turning point. But no, actually, we can't have this going on in our cities. Rant over.